Hi! Today we're renaming fractions as decimals, but first let's look back at our last lesson where we related fractions to decimals. Remember that 4/10 written in decimal form is 0.4, 1600ths is 0.16, and 1 and 2/100ths is 1.02. Do you remember the trick to check? Remember that if there is 1 0, then we only have one spot behind the decimal. If there are 2 zeros, we have 2 spots behind the decimals. Similarly, we know how to rewrite decimals as fractions. 0.87 is 87/100ths, or 87 over 100. 0.022 is 22 thousandths. And 8.009 is 8 and 9 1,000ths. Same trick here, however many decimal places there are, that's how many zeros should be in your denominator. But before we move on, let's review one more thing. If we have 2 over 25 is equal to n over 100, how do we figure out what n is? Well, 25 times what gives us 100? That's right. 25 times 4 gives us 100. Think about 4 quarters gives you $1. So 4 25s, right, gives you 100. So we have 25 times 4 over here, and whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. 25 times 4 is 100, and 2 times 4 gives us 8. So n is equal to 8. Let's try one more, just to make sure we're good on this. We have 3 over 5 is equal to r over 10. How do we know what r is? Well, 5 times 2 gives us 10, and whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So r is equal to 6. Okay, let's get to the good stuff. So how do we write 3/4 as a decimal? Well, first we have to divide the numerator by the denominator, or as I like to say, bottom into top. So if we do bottom into top, then we're doing 4 into 3. And since 4 can't go into 0, we have to add a 0. But whenever we add a 0, we add up top a, you got it, decimal. And now we can do 4 into 30, which we know goes in 7 times, because 4 times 7 is 28. And 30 minus 28 is 2. 4 can't go into 2, so we have to bring down another 0. And now we have 4 into 20, which we know is an even 5. So 3/4 as a decimal is equal to 0.75. When it comes to fourths, you can think about it in terms of quarters, which is what I like to do. So if you have 1 quarter, you have 25 cents, or 0.25, and 1 quarter is 1/4. If you have 2/4, or 2 quarters, you have 50 cents. If you have 3/4, which is the same as 3 quarters, you have 0.75. And if you have 4 quarters, then you have $1, right? So when you see fourths, as in a denominator of 4, think quarters, and this will make your life a little bit easier. Now, to rename a mixed number as a decimal, like we have here, 9 and 1/16, we first separate the mixed number into a whole number part and a fraction. And you might be going, what are you talking about? Well, if we have 9 and 1/16, it's called a mixed number, right? And if something's mixed, it means you have at least 2 parts to it. So in a mixed fraction, we have the whole number, and then we have the fraction. So we have to separate these two into 9 plus 1/16, right? Which is 9 and 1/16. It's the exact same thing, but we have to separate them first. And now we rename the fraction part, which is 1/16, as a decimal. And we do that by bottom into top, bottom into top. So that looks like 16 into 1. But as we know, 16 can't go into 1, so we have to add a 0, and whenever we add a 0, we have to add a decimal up top. So now we have 16 into 10, but 16 can't go into 10, so we have to add another 0 in here, and that means we have to bring a 0 up here. So now we can do 16 into 100, which goes in 6 times, and 16 times 6 is 96. So now we have a remainder of 4. 16 can't go into 4, so we have to bring down a 0. 16 into 40 is twice. 16 times 2 is 32. And now we have a remainder of 8. And 16 can't go into 8, so we have to bring down a 0. And now we have 16 into 80. And let's try 16 times 5, which gives us 80. Perfect. So now our decimal, or our fraction, 1/16 can be written as 0.0625. And now all we have to do is add the whole number part and the decimal together. So remember, our whole number is 9. So now we have 9. And now we have to add our decimal, right? So we have 9 plus 0.0625, which is just 9.0625. So you're basically just separating them, turning the fraction into a decimal by dividing bottom into top, and then you're just bringing these two parts back together. Let's try another one. Let's try turning 2/5 into a decimal. So remember, our first step is to divide the numerator by the denominator. And again, as I like to call it, bottom into top, bottom into top. So now we do 5 into 2. But as we know, we can't really do this, so we have to add a 0 here, which means that we add a decimal up here. Now we have 5 into 20, which is 4, as you know, and that gives us with no remainder. So now our decimal is 0.4. And that's all there is to it. Let's try one more just for good measure. So we have 7 4/5. Now remember, our first step is to separate the mixed number into a whole part and a fraction. So 7 4/5 is equal to 7 plus 4/5. They're exactly the same thing, right? And now we rename the fraction part as a decimal. And we do that by dividing bottom into top. 5 can't go into 4, so we have to add a 0 here and a decimal up here. 5 into 40 we know is 8. So 4/5 is the same as 0.8. And lastly, we add the whole number, which we know is 7, and we add it to the decimal. So 7 plus 0.8 is just 7.8. Bam! You got it. Now, what if you're a black sheep who likes to do things a different way? Well, you're in luck, because I love black sheep, and I have something for you. We have a shortcut for renaming fractions. So if we have the fraction 12/25 and we want to rename it as a decimal, we can do this without having to do the division. That's because when a fraction has a denominator that is a factor of 10, 100, or 1,000, you can rename that as an equivalent fraction with a number that is a power of 10. Don't worry, it's going to look way easier than it sounds. So 25 is a factor of 100, correct? Remember, there are 4 quarters in a dollar, so 25 times 4 equals 100. So what we can do is we can do 12 over 25, and now we can rename it to an equivalent fraction that has a denominator that has a power of 10, in this case 100. So 25 times 4, and whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top, so 12 times 4. And now we have 100 on the bottom and 48 on the top. And we learned this in the last lesson, and we already know how to rename fractions that are over a power of 10 as decimal, right? 2 zeros on the bottom, which means there needs to be 2 spaces, so 48 over 100 is 0.48. But if you're thinking, I'm going to stick with long division, that is absolutely okay. I just like to give you options. Try these tonight on your own for homework, and bring them tomorrow to class for credit. Remember to at least try, and remember that you can always go back and rewind this video if you need. I know you can do this. You got it.